Hello! Remember last episode when our adventuring party was suddenly attacked by a giant sea serpent? No? Well, you can watch it right here. But for everyone else, that's where we left off. Skrundle, Minnow, and Alana staring up, dumbfounded, at a massive beast looming over the very boat they were hired to protect. And Alana informing her mates that, well, she can't swim. Good thing she's a druid that can turn into almost any animal she wants, right? Right? Well, time to put up or shut up, as they say. With the guttural roar emanating across the ocean like an otherworldly alarm clock, startling everyone aboard to their senses. All deckhands and captain who were previously asleep began scrambling out to see what was happening on their boat, then abruptly turning around to quiver in fear or pick up arms to aid their protectors. Minnow turned to address his compatriot's confession.
Well, can't you just turn into a walrus or something? No? What? Why a fat walrus? Anyways, I never learned how to shape myself into any water creature. For crying out loud.
But I can do this. With a flourish, Alana jumped into the air and quickly shrunk her body with a poof, before emerging as a nimble hook-billed hawk that rose swiftly through an updraft to encircle and survey the situation. The sea serpent roared again before lunging at Alana. It missed the tiny target but struck the foresail instead, burying its face in a tangle of canvas tarp and rope, buying the people below some precious time as it flailed in frustration, raining down splinters and seawater. Skrundle had already run to port, yelling in a wild fashion, and began futilely stabbing the monster as best he could with his tiny daggers. But the beast's hide was far too thick, as the sharpened stilettos merely glanced off with a clang.
Hey, this thing has one hell of a tough skin. I can't pierce it for nothing.
As a few other deckhands ran to his side, whacking away with brooms and short swords. But the sudden silence from above raised their suspicions, as everyone glanced up to see the monster had freed itself. They sprang out of the way as the enormous eel struck downward, mouth agape, to snap shut upon the port side railing where the group had just been. A couple of men had been knocked overboard as splintered wood went flying in all directions, and were now frantically trying to swim for safety. Its massive body rocked the hull. Alana dove for its eyes to distract it once again. Keeping his eyes on the ferocious beast, Minnow offered a hand to Skrundle, who was laying on the ground after the assault.
Does something seem off to you about this sea monster, Scrun?
Skrundle grunted as he took Minnow's hand and stood up.
Aside from the fact that we're under-equipped to deal with this? No, not really. My daggers didn't even pierce its hide. Right, hide. You ever hear of a fish that sounded like an anvil when you hit it with a dagger?
Skrundle looked puzzled, but said nothing.
Right. How's that arm of yours?
Skrundle raised an eyebrow and rubbed his shoulder.
Here's what we're gonna do.
Minnow called to Alana, who dove in quickly and landed on his shoulder, as Skrundle ran out to poke and dodge around the serpent, whose almost mechanical-like strikes missed over and over again. The boat was taking a beating, but the agile thief did his job. Looking over his shoulder, Minnow tossed him a thumbs up, and Alana took off to the sky, grabbing the monster's attention yet again, but this time purposely leading it to the bow, diving into and out of its face, raking her claws across its eyes when she could. Glancing back at her friends, the time was right. She hit an updraft and floated listfully away, the serpent's eyes tracing her movement. In a flash, she changed directions, diving for the outer jib sails, and turning at the last moment to duck behind as the slavering brute made another attempt at its annoyance. Alana guffawed. Yet again she had trapped the monster amongst the boat's rigging and sails. But this time, in its wild thrashing and before she could get away, a stray pulley shot out in her direction, knocking her unconscious as she fell to the deck in a heap. Meanwhile, Scrundle crouched in anticipation with daggers drawn, as Minnow clutched one of his rolled cigarettes, protecting it from the elements, whispering an incantation. It sparked to ignition without so much as a flicker. Lowering it to Scrundle, he wafted the sweet smoke in concentric circles around his weapons, which in turn began to glow with radiating energy. Snubbing out the snout with a snap of his finger, Minnow stood and said, "All right. Wait for my signal, Scrun." Now, shaking off the remaining debris from Alana's ploy, the sea serpent rose yet again with a huff of smoke from its nostrils. It loomed over the pair and growled with guttural frustration. For a final time it lunged, mouth opened for the killing blow. Be it the ship or its crew, this was it. "Now!" Minnow screamed. Scrundle launched his knives as hard as he could, leaving a glowing tangerine trail as they disappeared into the maw of the monster. Scrundle shut his eyes and tensed. Minnow watched in anticipation, and then... the enchanted daggers erupted from within the monster's own mouth, obliterating its entire head from the inside out. But instead of blood and gore showering the crew, there was instead a mess of shrapnel, metal gears, small electronic sizzles and pops. Thick chunks of iron plate dropped with a clunk. The beast was a machine. Its heavy, lifeless body fell to the deck, headless and leaking oil before slowly sliding off and over the side, never to be seen or heard from again. And as the smoke cleared and dust settled, the crewmen cheered in triumph with many a huzzah. But through that came a rather odd bit of arguing that could also be heard. There, tussling about at the base of the main mast, were 3 small goblins, wearing some very odd-looking clothes, swearing up a storm and beating each other with what looked like machine parts. Minnow came to stand over them as Scrundle went looking for Alana. The goblins took a beat, and slowly looked up mid-tumble. Minnow had lit another snout, took a deep inhale, then held their gaze inquisitively.
"Hey, I found her!"
Scrundle was moving the mess of tarps and ropes near the bow. Sure enough, he helped Alana to her feet with a grunt, who, aside from a few cuts and bruises, was now nursing a leg and holding her left arm, but seemed no worse for the wear. Together, she and Scrundle hobbled over to stand next to Minnow. He offered her the snout. She held up a hand, and instead sent a vicious kick into the ribs of the nearest goblin with a crunch.
"Yeah, what was that for? Can't you see we're helpless?"
Huh. A goblin that speaks common language. Ooh, I'm glad our trio made it out of that one. For a minute or two I wasn't sure. Then lo and behold, goblins. Now I won't speak ill of my own kind, but these 3 might have just fallen out of the frying pan and into the fire, so to speak. Well, tune in next week for the conclusion to this lost tale. And please, leave a comment below and share these stories with others. It truly helps. So until then, farewell for now.